Hello all, my name is Rich Ackerman and I teach electrical instrumentation here at Western. And I'm not going to tell you that I'm an expert on everything that we're about to talk about, because really you got to get like a doctorate in nuclear engineering, a doctorate in alternative energy, and a doctorate in natural gas powered power plants to be able to be an expert in all those. And I sadly have not done that. But I am going to basically bring up a bunch of things that concern those of us who work in industry, the electrical industry, and how some of the things that are talked about, they're hot items when they're talking with the political races, right? Everybody's like, clean coal, coal is bad, we need to go natural gas. Oh, we'll need wind and solar. You know, we need this magical power source that doesn't deplete, called renewables. So, how many of us here are consumers of electrical power? Everybody, right? I mean, unless you live in the countryside with a candlelight and no smartphones. No, that would be a sore subject, right? Especially for the teenagers of the day. I mean, even myself, I particularly enjoy my smartphone. Couldn't live life at this enjoyment level if I didn't have it. So, I guess what we could say is that we all like power, right? We all love to have electricity. So, what do you do when the power goes out? Let's say there's a storm and they knock out a transformer that feeds your subdivision. What do? Go to your friend's house where they have power, right? Or kick up your emergency generator, things like that. So one of the things that I like to do, I like to be able to turn on whatever device I have in my house and it just comes on, right? And that largely is owes itself to coal. Because as coal became one of our most valuable assets, it started out being picked up off of exposed seams out of the ground. So how many of you can walk around Rock Springs and point out exposed coal seams? They are everywhere. I know there's one down by Bunnings Pipe Yard, down by Blairtown Road. I stopped there with my kids and we mined coal right out of the ground, right there. Now, was it enough to do anything with? Not so much. But it was cool to get to show them that this is how it started. That's what we started with coal, right? Back in the day, back in the Bronze Age. That's something that, we didn't have to really mine for it because there were exposed coal seams. So once they figured out they could burn it, they started using it. And it was a minor player in human economy up until about the Industrial Revolution. Now, the Industrial Revolution was kick-started and driven by coal. Because how else could we get such a power-packed thing to drive industry? Was wood going to do it? Not so much, because coal doesn't, follow the same rules as wood. You got to grow wood, right? We're better off making furniture out of it, or cars, or whatever. Houses. Can you do any of that with coal? No, but we can sure fire up a boiler, right? And we can use steam power to move things. We can do so much with coal, right? That's like what our power plants do these days. They actually use coal to heat boilers, and then after that steam is heated in the boiler, it escapes. It's run through a steam turbine, which then turns a generator, and then, that creates some internal magic that creates electricity for us to use, right? So, while they're out there running these coal-fired power plants, you have to understand that they're not actually running full bore all the time, right? So this fabulous picture here, anybody recognize this? You probably should, because this is in your backyard. This is the Jim Bridger power plant, right? Now, does that thing look like it's running full bore? I mean, look at the stacks. I mean, they're just pumping out whatever that is, right? That flue gas that's coming out of there, it's coming out at a high rate. And what else is in that flue gas? I mean, what is that stuff made out of? What you basically see is mostly steam. Most of what you can actually see is steam. Wonderful, right? So, as this thing's sitting here running, it's actually not running full bore. Because they don't run the power plants full speed all the time, right? Well, stuff breaks, doesn't it? We've got to kind of throttle back a little if we're not, we don't need that. What drives the coal-fired power plants, and what drives them at the level they need to be run at? Does anybody know what decides how hard we got to run these power plants? We have this thing called demand, and it is a demand on the grid. You guys are familiar with the concept of the grid, right? The grid is what feeds all of our power here. It's the infrastructure that gets us here, right? Gets all the power to us. So, as we are all members of this society that lives on power, we're all interconnected to the grid. So that grid, all the power plants in the whole country are linked up to it, right? And we're just drawing our piece from the big puzzle. As we, draw our power from the big grid, sometimes a spike in demand happens, like in the summertime. How many of you turn on your air conditioners in the summertime? Unless you have some other form of cooling, you're probably going to be running an AC or a swamp cooler, right? Or at least 16 fans in every window to try to get that natural draft, right? What happens when everybody in the nation, well, not the nation, let's say everybody in Rock Springs, we'll micro-size this a little bit, turns their air conditioner on at the same time because it's all 9 o'clock in the morning, the sun is out, it starts to get warm. What happens to the grid? You experience that spike in demand, right? Because an air conditioner is an extremely power-hungry unit. In fact, a lot of them actually have breakers on the plug-in you plug into the wall. So, as such, now the grid says, oh, we need to supply a whole lot of power to so-and-so, right? Oh, and this guy needs it too, and this guy needs it too. We don't have that much power to give. So what happens? What happens to supply that power? Well, the power plant operators, they kick it up a few notches, right? And they bring online that boiler that they've had idling all morning. Okay, so let's say Jim Bridger Power Plant, let's pretend that it supplies power to us right here. Let's pretend that that power is for us. And we kick on that AC unit, right? And let's say they're idling 2 of their 4 units and the other 2 are just up and just running. When we experience that demand, they kick in another unit. They throttle it up, right? So then, wow, man, my device is turned on. I'm happy, right? I'm a happy power customer. So now that you have a concept of the demand and how we can meet that demand, we have this on-demand ability to cover for those needs, right? Now, you can't forecast how much electricity any given region is going to need at any given time, but I can tell you that if you don't try to forecast, you're going to be short. If you don't even try, right? So, something that I want you to think of to stick in your mind is that we as humans who are not part of the power generation scheme really don't even have a concept of what it takes to throttle up and meet that demand, right? I mean, do we have anybody who works closely with the power supply, any of the power supply industry? So I don't even work close enough with them that it doesn't even make that much difference to me. I know for a fact. They generate power. When the peak time comes, they ramp it up. When they're no longer in peak time, what do? They throttle back, right? Awesome. So most of us don't really have an idea of how that magic comes to be or how magical it really is until you have a power outage, right? You can't play your World of Warcraft or your Fortnite or your whatever, right? Kills my kid. He hates that. Can't play his Fortnite. Sorry, kid. Very sorry. So, coal being a very useful substance, would it suffice to say we could do other stuff with it? Well, you probably didn't know, or you may have. Some of you have seen, like, let's say, the black toothpaste that became a very popular thing recently. What gave it the black color? Activated carbon, right? Activated charcoal. That's coal. Yum. So just to be clear, I never tried the black toothpaste because it really weirded me out. I guess if you grew up with it, it would be a little bit better, right? You'd be more open to it. Not this guy, I'm sorry. We make soaps, we make cosmetics, we make even plastics, nylon clothing fibers, rayon. A lot of these things can actually come from carbon, well, coal, and they are derived as a product of coal. I mean, even the water and air purification systems. How many of you guys have like a fish tank at home? And you've got a filter, right? Please say you have a filter. One of those filters is going to be activated charcoal, activated carbon. Well, that soaks up impurities, doesn't it? You know, like ammonia and stuff from your fishies. Sure, the magic of coal. Something else that you probably might not be aware of, coal is used in the production of steel. And not just in the big industrial sense either. Even the blacksmith working in his backyard, beating away on an anvil, if he's working with mild steel, that's some soft stuff, right? Well, what if he needs that piece of mild steel to have some hardness to it, some toughness? Well, then we've got to change the chemical composition of it, right? How do you make steel harder and tougher and more abrasion resistant? What is the most basic thing you can do? Heat it up and add carbon, right? So you got to turn it from mild steel into carbon steel. Can you do that with coal? You bet you can. Happens all the time, right? Sure it does. Coal contributes to that process by donating some of its copious amounts of carbon. Piles and piles of carbon. I mean, that's, after all, what coal is made out of, carbon and hydrogen, right? Lots of it. Did you also know that you can change coal's physical properties and it also alters its burn characteristics to make it burn cleaner? You can do different things with it. One is you can actually make liquid fuel out of coal. A liquid hydrocarbon fuel out of a chunk of rock. Strange, right? Good concept. Something I actually didn't really know until as of late. Another thing you can do with carbon, they actually do this, they pulverize it. So they'll take this awesome chunk of rock, they'll crush it until it's a fine mist of a powder, and then they run it into these boilers on a blanket of air, and then it's fed into the boiler, and wherever it goes, whatever it does, it combusts like that. It burns hotter when it's pulverized, and it burns faster. So you can actively get that unit ramped up online pretty quick, right? If we got some hot fire going real quick, sure. Another thing that gets overlooked, that I have learned, you can also gasify coal. Anybody ever heard of the process of gasification? It's often overlooked, it's not really popular, it's kind of clunky, but it's interesting because The method of superheating something until it decomposes into its component gases. You can vaporize coal, it's called gasification, and the products generally are water vapor, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen. You can feed that into an internal combustion engine and actually fuel your vehicle with gasified coal. Coal's not the only thing that can be gasified, but it's all that we're really going to mention today. Okay? One key takeaway to that is that some things you can do to coal actually give it the ability to emit less polluting chemicals. That's the takeaway from that. So, I guess one of the questions that I wanted to ask, kind of got interested in this, was why did coal get such a bad reputation to begin with? I mean, it kick-started our whole way of life, didn't it? Without the Industrial Revolution, where would we be right now? We'd still be villages and towns, bartering raw materials and making things by hand, would we not? Sure. I feel like the Industrial Revolution was coming anyway, and if it didn't happen then, why wouldn't it be happening now, right? Why not? So, I guess you could say that coal got a bad reputation when people started realizing that, oh man, the coal miners are dying. They're getting this weird sickness called black lung. Nobody else gets that. That's strange. People that work with this stuff, they're dying. Maybe it's not such a good thing after all. Well, what else does it cause? What other problems do we have? As you can see, sulfur dioxide contributes to acid rain and respiratory illnesses. Sulfur dioxide, SO2, something that I personally worked with at a previous job. Anybody ever strike a match and you can smell it from the next room? That's the sulfur dioxide that you're smelling. It's burnt sulfur. So that, excuse me. That sulfur dioxide spends some time in the atmosphere and ends up doing a dance with some water molecules and comes back down to see us as acid rain. Anybody ever hear of the acid rain problem from back, when was that, the 90s and the early 2000s? It was one of the big buzzwords. Anybody remember that? I mean, I do. So I remember I was in high school for some of that. And they were losing their minds. Oh, the acid rain, the acid rain. So that's probably one of the key factors to coal getting a bad reputation, right? Nitrogen oxides. These are your NOx emissions. This is a big deal as of late. Like when you talk to the EPA about anything that you're going to build and it burns a fuel, one of the top things that you're going to have to certify is the NOx emissions, NOx. So these nitrogen oxides contribute to smog and respiratory illnesses. Yeah, everything contributes to smog and respiratory illnesses, especially the next one, the particulates. Anybody have any idea what a particulate is? What about, have you seen the DPF filter or heard about it? Because I know it's a major selling point on the diesel trucks that they're selling these days. It has a DPF filter on it. That's a particulate filter. So when fuel burns, it doesn't just create gases, it creates these suspended particles, right? The particulates are just particles. Some of it looks like soot, some of it looks like ash. But these particulates, they're everywhere. You're not going to get away from them, but they do want to cut them down, right? So whatever the fuel is you're burning, it's probably going to create some sort of particulate, right? Soot is just a condensed particulate. Smog, haze, respiratory illnesses, lung disease. Most of these particulates not water soluble, which means your body doesn't just get rid of it. So that probably has a little bit to do with some of the lung cancer people are having, silicosis and stuff like that. Of course, I'm not that environmental scientist type, so I don't really know. I know it's one of the big things they watch out for. I'm going to get a little out of order on this because I feel like mercury and other heavy metals should be next on the list in hindsight. Mercury and other heavy metals. So when you burn stuff, especially something that's lived down in the earth for millions and millions of years, right? Do you actually know what's in there? No, you really don't. I mean, we can mine a lot of different metals out of the earth, right? And let's say we are at a coal seam and it's got a high amount of mercury in the coal. When you burn the coal, where does that mercury go? Those mercury compounds. Goes up and out, right? But then we don't have to worry about it no more, do we? Well, we do, because it doesn't go anywhere. When you go outside, guess what you're breathing? You're breathing the air that has been shared by all of the humans and all of the animals and all of the plants. You're breathing everything that has come out of every power plant around the earth. It doesn't just go away. Excuse me. Now I want to kind of approach the subject of carbon dioxide. How many of you have heard carbon dioxide in the news within the last year or two? You probably should have heard it about 1,000 freaking times, because carbon dioxide has been taking the blame as one of the worst greenhouse gases that we have, right? It's been taking a lot of blame for that. A lot of carbon dioxide is emitted when coal and natural gas and oil and wood and whatever else burns. I mean, it's one of the major byproducts of combustion, carbon dioxide. The last thing on the list, fly ash and bottom ash. Now these are residues, that's what's at the bottom of, let's say you have a pellet stove, you got to clean the ash out of the bottom. Basically what we're looking at. Fly ash is useful though. It actually goes into making pretty strong concrete. They use it in other industries as well. Same goes for the bottom ash too. There are uses for that, like fertilizer. That's one of the big ones that I know of. So now that we've talked about the things that are giving coal a black eye, let's talk about it some more and beat up on it, shall we? So, as I stated, coal fueled the Industrial Revolution, did it not? Sure it did, right? That's what got us to go, got us going, got us started. That's what humans started to become more productive, right? Industrial Revolution. The problem is that coal was the hard charger, it was the lead. And now it's become that kind of wolf in sheep's clothing. And a few years back, I know that they were talking about coal needs to be outlawed, right? Coal is the worst thing we can do. Just ask some of your politicians. Now, I don't hold any political views because, well, I keep them to myself. But what do we do? What can we do about how hard coal has such a grip on our lifestyle? What can we do? Anybody have any idea what would happen if we made coal illegal today? What happens tomorrow? We get the EPA, they'll be happy, right? Sure they will. Because not only will the emissions from coal stop, Well, they got their wish, right? So they're going to have to come up with something else to be upset about. What else happens if coal stops? I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Not only will we kill the emissions, but what else do we take away? That on-demand power supply, right? So if we have that power not available anymore, what are we going to do? Has anybody seen the charge on renewable energy? You've heard about it, haven't you? What's our major renewable energies they're talking about these days? You've seen the wind turbines over by Evanston, right? And you've seen them over back the other way by Laramie and that, yeah? So one of the things that we hold true here in Wyoming is that the wind always blows, right? Until it doesn't. I got to tell you that, in a previous life, I would drive up and down Interstate 80 and see a whole field of wind turbines just sitting there. On those days when it's nice and hot, that summer weather is settled, we don't have a whole lot of wind going on, I want to turn on my AC, right? So what happens if you don't have an on-demand power source? You just have the wind, and it's not blowing. Anybody ever heard of another method of power generation called solar? Some of us have heard the buzzwords of solar. And solar seems like a knight in shining armor, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't have any moving parts, right? It doesn't burn anything, so that's cool. But it's very vulnerable to things like a cloud and smog and haze, right? So, yeah, solar works and wind works. They both work when they do, right? Which is okay. But if you know anybody who lives off the grid and has a solar cell and a wind turbine on their property, you will know that they have scaled back their lifestyle quite a bit, right? Those guys have LED lighting. Don't try to run a microwave and an AC on a solar cell. Just saying. It's probably not going to happen. So what's another thing we can use? Hydroelectric. Thank you. Hydroelectric has a very good spot to live, right? Because it's always there, is it not? As long as the water flows, we have power. Now, hydroelectric is a very valuable source of energy, and it's always on. But it doesn't, and it doesn't require things like fuel. It doesn't require a lot of maintenance, right? If any of you guys have been through the Flaming Gorge Dam tour, you'll know that they take those things offline every so often so that they can maintain them, right? Yeah, because everything breaks. I'm going to tell you this is not a perfect world. Now, hydroelectric has its place, and it does supply a major amount of power to our country, right? But it's a good, steady source. Good, steady source. So it's always there. It's always on, always doing what it does, right? One of the other things that we can talk about is natural gas. Because believe it or not, natural gas is taking the place of some of your coal-fired power plants. And that has been touted by some as one of the reasons coal is in such a decline. Because we can just do it with natural gas, right? Where is natural gas? Where is it? It's everywhere, right? It's right here in your backyard. So wouldn't it make sense that we could just run them off of that? I mean, you could, but not only are you going to have to retrofit every boiler in the plant, you're going to have to run pipelines and do more of that to get it where it needs to be, right? So it's not going to be an overnight change, right? It's really not. Another alternative, and this one, it's a dirty word. I kind of believe in it, but a lot of people will tell you it's not worth the risks, and that is nuclear. Has anybody done any research or heard anything good about nuclear power plants? Everybody remember that was a tsunami took out the power plants in Japan? You guys know why that happened? I'll give you the quick overview. Tidal wave comes in, knocks out all of their power, right? Okay, so what happens now? Well, a nuclear reactor is driven by heat, by the heat of that decomposing metal material, right? And if that thing doesn't have energy to run the pumps to cool that heated nuclear radioactive, substance, then it goes into a state called meltdown, where it actually holds enough heat to melt concrete, right? That's a real thing that happens. So what happened was the tsunami wiped out their electrical grid. All right, cool. They had backup generators on site. Well, that worked great until the generators were out of fuel and flooded. And what happened then? Any guesses? So once it didn't have fuel or wasn't running, well, then we commenced meltdown, right? That site is still hot to this day. Hot, like they can't send humans in there. All right, so why would we want that? Anybody have any ideas on why we want to introduce that kind of a problem to our lives? Because when it works very well, right? So the fun thing about nuclear, what is the single major drawback about nuclear? Anybody have a guess? It is high risk, right? And it doesn't even just be a risk while the plant is operating, right? What happens to the spent fuel? Have you guys seen those radioactive decanters running down the interstate with the big old radioactive placard on the side? And it just looks like a big can. It says Energy Solutions on the side of it. That's radioactive waste. Where's it going? Somewhere, right? They're burying it in the desert for now, because what do you do with spent nuclear fuel? I don't know. Just ask a little kid, they'll tell you to send it to the sun, right? Yeah, good plan. Send it to the sun, because the sun is going to burn everything away and it'll be just fine. Okay, that's not very feasible, so moving along. Yeah, I don't know what to do with the waste. Can we re-enrich it and put it back into service? I'm not a nuclear scientist. I mean, I wish I was, that I could tell you what to do with it. For now, we're going to bury it in the desert and hope that it doesn't become an issue. What do you do? I mean, something I don't want to do is grow extra body parts or turn into Spider-Man, right? Well, the Spider-Man gig wouldn't be too bad. Flying around, doing your thing. So, we have these basic ideas to help. And I feel like nuclear is probably going to take a stronger foothold as things progress. But I want you to take note that these are all developing technologies, okay? Because the scientists that work in these fields, they don't just come up with something and then they're done. They don't. They come up with something, they want to make it better. Or their boss is going to pay their neighbor more to make it better. So that's what drives improvements, right? Scientific discoveries in America. What is it that drives it? It's capitalism. Where can I make the money, right? Tell you what, though, there's a lot of money in these things. Solar and wind, until just recently, I think that the tides are kind of turning on that. They cost more to build and maintain than they were actually producing power. More went into building and maintaining them than they offset with the power they produce. Emerging technology, right? You're not going to get it right on the first try. It's going to have to be an evolution. But they are evolving, okay? And they are getting better by the day. I mean, wind seems like a great idea until you come to Wyoming and the wind doesn't blow. There is that one day of the year that, it doesn't blow here, right? Solar, that's good until it's cloudy. They're working on that, though. They're actually coming out with more substances that conduct electricity better in low light conditions. They're also introducing a biocell, where bacteria actively aid in the conversion of sunlight to energy. So that's coming down the pipe. And then nuclear, back to that again. It's all good and grand until we have to find somewhere to put the waste. Don't just shoot it to the moon, because you're going to want to be there at some point, right? So, I guess in summary, the environmental crisis that coal is taking the blame for is in full swing. We don't really have a handle on it as humans. We are merely the architect of this destruction. And we have a brilliant thing to look forward to, scorched earth, right? I don't think that buying carbon offsets is going to let you have a big fat carbon footprint for too long, and government subsidies ain't going to do it either. The lie that is the offset. We all think we're helping, but really what it's going to take is a lot more. It's going to take a lot more. Something that coal has going for it is that it's going to retire at some point, and we won't really know how everything works out until that dust settles. So, and that concludes my presentation. Anybody have any questions?